America has been poisoned. This is my op-ed today over at hartmanreport.com. And in fact, it's titled, America Has Been Poisoned, Where's the Antidote? And we've been poisoned in a number of ways. I mean, first came the poison of the corruption of politics with big money. This goes back to Lewis Powell in 1971, writing the infamous Powell Memo, in which he argued that Ralph Nader was a threat to the American free enterprise system. In fact, this is a quote from the Powell Memo, quote, "Perhaps the single most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader, who, largely thanks to the media, has become a legend in his own time and an idol of millions of Americans." Ralph Nader, who, by the way, wrote the foreword to my book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Ralph and people like Rachel Carlson, who wrote the environmental book Silent Spring, which kicked off the environmental movement, believed, Lewis Powell, he believed that they were threatening the core of America's free enterprise system. He said the overriding first need is for businessmen to recognize that the ultimate issue may be survival of what we call the free enterprise system and all that this means for the strength and prosperity of America and the freedom of our people. His answer? Rich people and giant corporations need to jump into politics with both feet. Keep in mind, in 1971, corporations didn't give money to politicians by and large. There were only a couple thousand lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Now there's like 30,000. It was not a big business or a big industry. In fact, it was heavily regulated, going all the way back to 1907 with the Tillman Act that made it a federal felony for any corporation to give any sort of money or support to any candidate for federal office. It was illegal. So the next year, Richard Nixon put Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court, and ta-da! 6 years later, in 1978, Lewis Powell authors the Boston versus Bellotti decision, which said that corporations are people too, and corporations, if they want to pour enormous amounts of money into political campaigns, or billionaires as well, by the way, they want to pour enormous amounts of money into political campaigns, from literally the George Washington administration to the Reagan administration, or the Nixon administration, rather. This was 78, I guess. Actually, I guess this was the Carter administration. But from that period of time, when politicians took money from big corporations or from billionaires, it was legally, morally, and politically considered corruption. In fact, it was considered bribery. People went to jail for this. But the Supreme Court, Lewis Powell authored the decision in 1978, said, no, it's just First Amendment free speech. Money isn't money, money is speech. And corporations aren't legal fictions, they're persons. And of course, with Citizens United in 2010, the Supreme Court doubled and tripled down on it, striking down hundreds of more laws all across the country, good government laws. So first we were poisoned, our democracy was poisoned by big money, by the Supreme Court. Next came the poisonous memes designed to turn working people against each other. The morbidly rich and the corporations that made them that way, they hate labor unions. And so they started this campaign to convince average working people that union bosses were somehow getting rich off the unions and screwing their workers, which is totally bizarre logic. I mean, in a corporation, the CEO can get rich by taking dividends and by owning stock and goosing the stock value, or the stock price rather, by buying back, having the corporation buy back its shares. There's all kinds of ways the CEOs can basically rip off their workers and their companies. But union bosses take a salary from the union. There's no bonus, there's no stock options, there's none of that stuff. So it was a complete lie, but the Republicans started promoting this in the 70s, and it became a real thing in the 80s. Reagan promoted this like crazy. TV shows in the 80s and 90s even started picking up themes of corrupt unions. I remember seeing this, went back a year or so ago when Louise and I binge-watched the old Cagney and Lacey episodes, which are a real insight into the late 80s, early 90s. It's absolutely fascinating. Several of the stories were about, corrupt union bosses. And yeah, there were a few union bosses like Jimmy Hoffa who were in with the mob, but they were the exception to the rule, and the Justice Department, frankly, was taking them down. But in any case, you know, right-wing news, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, they echoed this. And then, you know, the state after state started signing up for right-to-work-for-less laws. And pretty soon we went from 1/3 of America having good union jobs when Reagan came into office to today it's about 6% in the private workforce. It's bizarre. So then came the poisoning of race relations. Conservatives wanted to use race as a weapon to cleave particularly white voters from everybody else and from Democrats who were supporting, you know, good racial relations in the United States. This is, again, a relatively new thing. Yes, racism goes back forever, but in the 60s and 70s, we were making serious progress. We passed the Voting Rights Act, we passed and it was bipartisan, by the way. And Americans widely supported this, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65, or the other way around. These were passed with the broad support of Americans. We started seeing black people on TV being portrayed as something other than buffoons or clowns or bad guys. Norman Lear really led this. An old and dear friend, Norman Lear, he was now 100 years old and still kicking and still doing well. I spoke with him on the phone just the other night. Norman Lear's genius brought these folks to TV, and you know, we started seeing positive black faces on TV starting in the 90s, and you know, now more and more. But Nixon's strategies, his Southern strategy, really kicked this off. And then in 1998, George Herbert Walker Bush, with his Willie Horton ads, proved that it was still possible to win elections simply by appealing to white racism. And thus, you know, I think you can draw a straight line from that to Donald Trump declaring Mexicans as rapists. Then the next poison that we came was hustlers with help from the GOP poisoned Christianity. You know, Jerry Falwell and all his stuff saying to Pat Robertson, well, you know, the abortionists have to bear some burden for 9/11 because God will not be mocked. And when we destroy 40 million little innocent babies, we make God mad. I really believe the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, which, by the way, Norman Lear started. All of them have tried to secularize America. I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen. And Pat Robertson, yeah, I totally concur. And the problem is we've adopted that agenda at the highest levels of our government. I mean, you know, this was the poisoning of religion by the Republican Party. Then the NRA and weapons manufacturers poured the poison of guns across the land. You know, the average number of guns per 100 people in most Western countries is in the neighborhood of 20 per 100. Here it's 120 per 100. We are number 1 in the world. Number 2 is Yemen with 50 per 100 people. But, you know, everybody else, in Asia, in South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, it's less than 1 per 100 people. Even in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's about 20 per deadly weapons per people. So, you know, that poisoned us. And now we have the leading cause of death for children in the United States is no longer car accidents, it's guns. Then white supremacists, they're doing their best to poison our police and our military. Multiple reports, the one I quote in the articles from ABC, about how they're infiltrating the military and the police, these right-wing hate mongers. And then the semi-fascist MAGA Republicans are poisoning our system of governance. Multiple Republican states trying to make it harder for people to vote and all that kind of stuff. The Brennan Center documents this really well. They're poisoning our social and news media, you know, from Russian trolls to CNN getting rid of anybody who dares criticize Donald Trump or Republicans. Our news media is going. Putin, Trump, Orban, Xi, and other autocrats are trying to poison democracies worldwide. Donald Trump was helping them out with this. He famously embraced all these autocrats and dictators and sheikhs and killers, and then snubbed the leaders of democracies, tried to destroy NATO, dissed the United Nations, and his family received a $2 billion gift from Mohammed bin Salman in exchange, apparently, for this. And God only knows how many billions they wired into his offshore accounts, into Donald Trump's. And meanwhile, Russian and Chinese intelligence services are running disinformation campaigns on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, all over the place, all across social media. So what's the antidote to all this poison that the Republican Party and so-called conservatives and racists and fascists have been pouring into America? The antidote, as Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Wallace pointed out back in the day, is civic engagement. We need to double down on voting. We need to make sure everybody we know is voting. We need to inform our friends and neighbors. We need to share the word. We need to tell people what's going on and get Democrats, get these Republicans, particularly the Republicans who are the Trump humpers. 60% of Americans this fall will have a Trump-humping, election-denying Republican on the ballot for whom they can vote or against whom they can vote. 60% of Americans. I mean, this is breathtaking. So, 40 years of Reaganism has gutted America and laid the basis for this. Biden and the Democrats are off to a good start, but they need more people. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. I'll tell you about grifter Steve Bannon and what he's up to, what he's going through today, and we'll pick up your phone calls on the news of the day. Stick around.